There was a question.
Any trusted or zones question.
Any trusted people?
So, you have to take the microphone or
Does that mean you can just repeat the question?
Well, but maybe I won't hear.
No. With the VNIC support, does that mean you can now snoop from the zone?
Yes. Yes, VNIC does support, it's actually part of a Clearview project that provides snoop available from zones. But you only see the traffic for your interface.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I expect.
Yes. A question?
Yes, does OpenSolaris implement the zones the same way as Solaris does it? Everything?
There are some packaging differences between how zones are packaged in Solaris 10 versus OpenSolaris, because OpenSolaris is based on IPS, new packaging system, and new packaging commands. So that has some subtle effects on the way you install your zones. But from the kernel policy, it's the same. So everything that I said really applies to both Solaris 10, except for the crossbow and Clearview things. The networking, there's more sophisticated networking in OpenSolaris than there is in Solaris 10. Yeah.
Did the trusted extensions for the GNOME desktop, JDS, did that get accepted by the GNOME guys? Is that going to happen when GNOME goes to GNOME?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. There are parts, and you could also consider X Windows as part of GNOME, although it's technically different because Alan Koop's is back, and he's the X guru here, so he could explain exactly. But here's there's a couple of parts where the status of GNOME is. First of all, there are parts of GNOME that we modified, like the window manager and panel, that have not been put back into the GNOME upstream, although that is always planned. They are open source. You can browse them on the OpenSolaris browser. If you go to the JDS, you can find them and you can browse through the changes. So they are open source, but they haven't been put upstream. The plan is to do that, and it keeps on getting deferred. Then there are the unique files like the selection manager, the trusted stripe, and so on. These things are also open source, but they probably wouldn't get put back upstream because they could only run on a trusted extensions kernel. They're very specific to Solaris, and they wouldn't run on a non-Solaris platform. They wouldn't run in standard GNOME, and nobody else would be changing them because they're not applicable to anybody else. So I don't know if there's any benefit to putting them upstream.
My big issue is that I do not want to see us repeat history of Unix having a decades-old desktop environment because we can't keep up with the times.
Well, we are keeping up pretty well. We do have in OpenSolaris we're running the latest. Trusted Extensions is using the same version of GNOME that Linux is using.
Right. And
it is our intent to stay in sync. It's our burden, though, because we haven't upstreamed everything, it takes us more work to merge.
Right.
I understand that. Now, as far as X is concerned, you want to say something about that, or no? You want me to make something up? Our intent is to upstream as much as possible of what we've changed in X. So we are in the process of re-implementing the hooks that we're using in the X server to use the XACE hooks, which are the same that are used by SE Linux. So our code is going to be structured the same way as SE Linux, but our policy is different. And that will help in terms of keeping the code in sync.
I guess I'm a little skeptical of you because, dtrace is pretty Solaris specific, yet PHP accepted, your dtrace modifications because they're just if-defs, I guess.
Right. Well, in the case of, let's take SE Linux and X. Okay. The SE Linux, there's an SE Linux extension for X that is in the source tree for Xorg, but it won't work on Solaris because it makes calls to libraries and things that don't exist on Solaris. But it's in the source tree anyway. Okay. And it's in our OpenSolaris source tree. You can look for the SE Linux code. Okay. So we should be able to put our trusted extensions code just the same way. It won't run on Linux, but it'll be there. It can be read by a Linux user if it want to. Okay.
Actually, I have a quick question about resource management and zones.
Yes.
It's probably an RTFM thing. Can you bind a zone to use specific CPU and
Yes.
amount of limited
Yeah.
memory?
So the question is about resource management in general for zones. There is the ability to specify specific CPUs. What you do is you associate zones with projects, and then projects can be associated with specific CPUs and bandwidth issues and other resource management issues.
That's the key. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
In fact, if we were marketing people instead of engineers, instead of saying zones, we'd say Solaris containers. That would imply
Well,
zones plus resource.
yeah, that's the way they try. The zone feature is really, from the kernel perspective, it's the isolation security boundary.
Okay.
But the container word refers to that plus resource management.
Okay. That makes sense.
So Glenn got most of the questions so far. Are there any? Oh yeah. Exactly. Are there any additional questions? For example, we have the Kerberos guru here. No one has asked a Kerberos question yet. So maybe oh, there you go.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sure.
What's your favorite kind of corn dog?
Lobster corn dog. How come you didn't ask me that?
Glenn, what is your favorite type of corn dog?
I didn't know there was more than one.
That's why you didn't ask you.
We just ate at the Marriott. We just ate at the Marriott next door, and they had lobster corn dogs. So that's where it goes.
Okay.
I've never seen them before.
I didn't know there was more than one either. I don't even know if I've ever had one. Yeah, what are the latest developments in Kerberos? What are you working on these days?
Can we talk about current projects?
Yeah.
Is that legal?
Aren't they open source?
Yeah. Well, they're not out there yet, but they will. MIT just released 1.7 Kerberos, and it's got a lot of Microsoft interoperability stuff. So the Windows pack is finally coming to Unixes, and I will be in Solaris soon. And that helps us interoperate with SIFs really well. And the other cool thing we're working on is long-range processes, a nice, elegant solution for that, and I'm not sure if anybody else has that, so that will definitely be pretty cool.
What about smart card integration?
PKInit, the infrastructure's there. We need PAM support, and that's coming soon too.
Any other general questions or whatever questions?
I have a question for Valerie.
Oh.
So I remember times where source code that had anything to do with crypto was very hard to export, and I understand there were recent changes. What are the recent changes?
Well, there's some things I can talk about and other things I can't. But one of the big things is years ago you'd get Solaris and you'd have to go get the data encryption kit, and you'd have to do a special dance and promise us you weren't going to build weapons of mass. No, you don't. You haven't had to do it for a long time. So, well, as far as getting the data encryption, the good strength encryption, basically, that we all want. So, starting with Solaris 10 Update 4, which I think is it's super ancient now because we just released Update 7 and Update 8's well on its way. But that is now includes all strong crypto right there. It's pre-installed in the operating system. We still have the separate packages because it's a Solaris 10 kind of ism. You can't remove packages. But now instead of you having to go download them and go through a whole rigmarole of keeping them up to date, they're on the system. And for OpenSolaris, those packages no longer exist. It's just strong crypto by default all the time. So, and that impacts everything like Kerberos, OpenSSH, OpenSSL, all of those things now get access to the strong crypto and without having to do special dances. For our OpenSSL code that we ship, we are able to remove a bunch of silly if-defs about which crypto is there, and that's a lot more cool and easier to use.
Your crypt
anymore? Hang on a second.
You don't obscure the crypt functions in libc anymore. No more function 80f one, what was it?
So, if you go, there's some weird things here, and I kind of alluded to it during my talk. So around an open cryptographic interface, which we are still impacted by U.S. export regulations with respect to that. So as far as the actual cryptographic algorithms and things themselves, that's all open source. It's all on OpenSolaris.org. You can go look at that. There's no obfuscation for that. Now, as far as some other stuff related to being a pluggable cryptographic modules for an open cryptographic interface, there is still some obfuscation, unfortunately, for that. That is something that we at Sun and in Solaris are regularly reinvestigating. Sending requests to the government, going, well, can we do this, and what about this, and we point a lot to other open source things, and unfortunately. Some people get away with some things because they started as open source, and because we started as proprietary, we have a different path, and but it is something we don't like doing, and we are constantly working on seeing if we can get a better way. But unfortunately, there are laws, and we do have to abide.
I think I have an analogy for you. You can adjust the concentration of the Kool-Aid, but you can only use specific flavors that you have permission to use.
Right.
So there you go.
But it's starting particularly with Solaris 10 Update 4, and with OpenSolaris, it is so much better than it was even just 2 years ago. I mean, it's just the access to the stronger crypto and the availability of the different cryptographic algorithms is so much easier. It's night and day difference. So that's been quite a relief for, I know, us, the people that work in Solaris Security, and for those of us, trying to make patches and support the operating system. And for users, you don't have to go 2 places to get your crypto, just one. So it's so much better.
Now the cherry Kool-Aid is available for everybody.
With or without cyanide?
We ship it without, but it's open source. Do what you want.
All right.
I have another question. So it's actually for if there's sort of I'm waiting for people to sort of jump out. But anyway, actually for every single one of you, there are a lot of open Solaris projects going on right now. Which is sort of the most exciting one looking forward for any of you, all of you? Let's start with Glenn. He's pondering.
Okay, well. I think the one that's most interesting, I don't know if it's interesting to this group, and that's why I'm going to turn the question around if they're interested. So during Scott's presentation, you asked a question about whether the privilege boundary was on a process or on the object, effectively. We have 2 different projects to deal with refinement of the boundary so that it could be applied to different objects. And they have similar and confusing acronyms. One is fine-grained access policy, and one is flexible mandatory access control.
I've already lost.
FGAP and FMAC.
Yes. So the first one, the fine-grained access, is really an extension of our existing stuff, but to use the ability to remove privileges from a process, and then on an exception basis handle the failures, so that when you fail to be able to open up a file, for example, we'll have a daemon that will look through an exception list and say, well, you're not allowed to open up general files, but you are allowed to open this file. When you get like a DAC failure, you can open up this file even though you have a DAC failure. So that's the fine-grained access policy. That's one thing that you can follow in OpenSolaris. The other one is the flexible mandatory access control, which is based on Flask, like we have in SE Linux. That's a project that's also active that you can follow along on, and that is basically an attempt to implement type enforcement in the way you see it in SE Linux. Are you interested? So the reason I bring it up is that of interest to you?
It may be. I don't know. I just ran into privileges, like I said the other day, installing S10 U7. Just discovered, hey, wow, they're there.
Mostly privileges. Everything in privileges was introduced in Solaris 10, a first customer ship, what we call it, the initial release, except for the zone privileges.
Okay.
The ability to limit zone privileges was introduced in Update 3.
Oh, okay. No, and actually, so the other thing is, no, I've just now, I'm so old school to me saying UIDs, right? So I have to retrain myself into thinking more fine grained. You know, it's a learning curve. So yeah.
Okay.
I don't have anything day to day in mind.
Scott? Most exciting OpenSolaris security project?
Most exciting. Well, I don't know. So I guess I have a soft spot for a project called Validated Execution, which you can find on the OpenSolaris site. This is a project with a couple of different pieces, but the basic intent is to be able to protect your system against any kind of malicious or even accidental modification of the programs on the system. So the idea is to verify the integrity of the programs as they're loaded and executed, and this works for for binaries, for the libraries that they load, for kernel modules, anything that's, for that matter, for shell scripts and everything else. So basically, at exec time or DL open, or when a library is loaded, whatever, we verify the integrity of these programs, make sure they haven't been changed from what was originally digitally signed by Sun or whoever produced these things. And as you can imagine, there's some sort of complicated bits and pieces that make all that work together. Also includes bootstrapping this whole process, which is kind of an interesting challenge. And if you're familiar at all with the work of the Trusted Computing Group, that's an industry group that produces a module called a Trusted Platform Module, or TPM. It's found in pretty much all x86 hardware these days. It's also, in the case of Sun, it's on our Spark systems too. But pretty much everybody making PCs has these things in there. We'll use that TPM as a thing to help us do the bootstrapping. So we verify the initial components that that get loaded, the bootloader and the kernel and so forth, and let them verify the things that they load. And so you can go all the way back to, first instruction executed, and know that you're running a system that hasn't been tampered with. And I think that's a really powerful capability. I'm looking forward to when we have that in OpenSolaris.
So my friend Mark Phelan's working on the Fuse project, file systems in user space, and that looks pretty neat. So you can test file systems quicker and stuff, and that's just a weird sort of non-security thing that I think is really cool.
I guess we should expand it to non-security.
So.
Fair enough. Fair enough, Val. Valerie?
I'll have to just follow Glenn and Scott's lead. I'm sorry. The cryptographic framework, like I was saying, we do all of our development, all our design reviews, everything openly now, and I'm also a member of the OpenSolaris governing board, and that's kind of exciting, watching other communities grow besides the security community, like the crossbow community, and how far that's come in such a short time, and how that's building up, and that's very exciting to watch. And the big project I've got coming up in that space is, reworking again on another constitution, so for the OGB. So any of you who are OpenSolaris members, keep your eyes peeled. It should be exciting.
Who is an OpenSolaris member? Okay. Any of the non-Sun employees?
All right, so.
You have it?
Yes, it does.
Contributed anything in like 10 years.
But actually having an account makes you someone we care about. That means you care about what we're doing, and you're interested in Solaris and OpenSolaris, and we're love to have feedback and love to have you participate more in the community. But some people, governance isn't their thing, and you're just producing code or providing code reviews, or even just saying, I like that, I find is very useful feedback from community members. Your contributions don't have to be code. They could be all sorts of things, like, I hit this bug and I think maybe this might be the fix, or this is a really cool new feature I discovered, and telling people about it.
I feel like he was complaining about Sassel earlier, so. Like he was complaining about Sassel at dinner, so I'm enjoying Open. So fix it.
That works. So I have a question for you guys. You're using other operating systems too. Are there operating systems features you're missing in OpenSolaris? Something that you think is cool, we should have? I don't know. Any different use of what we've presented that might not be apparent to us?
The problem is just the opposite. I need things out of OpenSolaris into other things, CFS. But no, I can't think of the other way. Okay. I can't think of. Looks like OpenSolaris has been bringing it all lately, so I don't know.
What about you guys? Still pondering? All right, well, before I forget to tell you about it, we have lots of swag, and the word swag apparently is an abbreviation for Sun Value Added Gifts. So there are CDs, there is OpenSolaris booklets. Yeah, if you type that into Google, well, you can tell the quality of a search engine by typing an acronym in that you know and seeing how many valid expansions actually come up. I used to do it with ATM, right? So type in swag and see what happens.
Well, I thought that was stuff we all get.
Well, in that case, I have lots of these books. There's also some T-shirts, and then I have one of these OpenSolaris Bibles, and I kept wondering how should I give this away? Who should get it? And I decided earlier, if there's one person who asks a question of every presenter, well, aside from me, that person should get the book, and that was you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, you can give it away if you want, of course.
How about a rolly card?
It is a Bible. Well, anyway, thank you, everyone.